Hello, Jose.
Hey, how you doing? How's my audio? I'm getting a warning that it's too low, but I think it was great earlier.
No, you sound good to me.
All right.
Looks like we got a few folks already in the call. Good morning and maybe good afternoon or evening to everybody.
All right. Thanks, Robert.
Cool. We'll give it just another moment or two before we get started, just to make sure that we get everybody joining here. In fact, what I'll do, Jose, I'll go ahead and just start sharing my screen here. Maybe.
You guys will notice that Dan now has his GitHub hoodie on because he was jealous last time that I was the only one with my GitHub hoodie on. That's right. This is how we travel if we come to you as a customer, matching outfits and all.
That's right. Yep. We're like zebras. We find that in bulk if we dress similarly. It's like camouflage.
Keeps us safe here in the Bay. We're incognito. All right, Dan. Well, we are a minute after. How long do you think we should wait here? 2 minutes? 3 minutes? We do both do our hair the same way. Thank you. Dan always appreciates those comments. He thinks they're very funny.
Yeah, it's a way for me to laugh off my jealousy. That's all I can do. Oh yeah, Alex made a great post in the chat asking where folks are dialing in from. I'm really curious to see who the most exotic location is. I imagine suburban San Diego is probably not the most the most exotic location. That's where I'm calling in from. Oh, South Africa, very cool.
Portugal. All right.
Portugal. Nice.
Yeah. Freezing London. We're freezing here. We're at about the same latitude, I think, in the Bay, West Coast. We're very cold as well. There's something afoot.
Wow, that's from Serbia.
All right.
That's fascinating.
Ireland, Germany. All right. Europe crew showed up. They were like, hey, you seem to like us. We're popping up.
All right, very cool. So let's go ahead and jump into it, Jose.
Yeah, cool. Hey, so my name is Jose Palafox, and welcome to AppSec Orchestration Essentials with GitHub Code Scanning with Jose and Dan. I am an application security executive here at GitHub, which is, generally just the title that describes my role here at GitHub. Is responsible for West Coast sales of GitHub Advanced Security. I work with our largest customers here on the West Coast in adopting GitHub Advanced Security and getting success with it. So super excited to share some of the learnings that we have today. If we have time at the end, we're going to talk about a customer case study from one of the customers that Dan and I support that adopted this architecture that we've been sharing with you in the last session and today. So super excited to be here and to share what we've been learning through our day-to-day jobs with you. And thanks for spending an hour with us. We really appreciate you being here. Dan, you want to do a quick intro? Sorry, I ate up all the time there.
Oh yeah, no apologies. So my mouse is clicking all over the place here. So it's great to have an opportunity to speak with everyone. My name's Dan Shanahan. Jose and I are kind of partners here on the West Coast. We primarily work with exactly like Jose called out, some of those large tech companies on the West Coast. My role is a field security specialist, which means I'm more kind of in the weeds on the technical aspect of GitHub Advanced Security and how GitHub Advanced Security features fit into your organization's DevOps processes. So it's great to meet everybody. Great to meet everybody again if you were able to join our session last week that we had on the same topic.
Yeah, so this is the second session in our AppSec learning journey. If you haven't seen the first, we will do a recap for you here. If you have seen it, understand the recap is going to be quick, so we'll get to the new stuff relatively fast here. But do go back and watch the first session if you didn't get a chance to see the recording yet. I think there's some good content there. During the presentation today, you can raise your hand using that raise hand button. or you can send us a chat in the chat session. We've been responding and laughing with you as you've been sharing where you're from. So feel free to ask us a question there. I may reply in chat if I'm not talking, or Dan may reply in chat. So keep an eye out there. You're also welcome to use the Q&A section or raise your hand, and we can bring you on stage during some of the polls. If something catches your eye today that you want to talk to us more about, there's a book a demo button on the upper right. And that means that Dan and I show up like a couple of zebras and talk to you in person. So feel free to throw up the call, and we'll come chat with you. Last point of order, I think, is we have 2 polls, and we'd love for you to participate. We just scrapped the data, I think, afterwards. So there's no, they're pretty lighthearted, but we would love your responses, and we do, talk about them internally and think about how they can direct our business. So please participate in those, because we find it really valuable. Okay, so I think that's all for nuts and bolts. So what are we going to do today? First, we're going to do a little bit of a recap of our last session. And then, really in that last session, we established, like, how do I hook up multiple scanning tools into GitHub so that I can have like a more complete AppSec program for my engineers, sort of delivered in this very shift left fashion. Like, developers contribute some code, they get instant feedback on it, and then they have context to remediate vulnerabilities without context switching. So that's what we really hit on last time. But the core challenge we left you with was like, there's a bunch of files in repos that you have to configure in order to do that. And so now what we want to do is talk about how do we address that problem and help you scale this scanning idea widely across your enterprise by centralizing where the configuration lives. So that's what we're going to do today. And like I said, at the end, we'll have a little case study if we've got time. So I've got to keep moving so that we can get to that case study. All right, so at the very beginning of last week's presentation, we started with this slide, and we really said, look, there's 2 big problems plaguing application security right now, and developers that have to interact with that tooling in particular. One is that developers get inundated with alerts. There's a lot of tools, and the oversaturation of alerts just makes their job frustrating. As security professionals, you're asked to address every threat vector, or to like make your enterprise as secure as possible. And that means that you have tons and tons and tons of point solutions that are all kind of like mashed in your environment together, lots of different UIs. It's hard for people to understand. It's complex. And so we want to solve both of these challenges because they're causing a really big problem. And the problem is different than what you might think it is. If you remember from our last session, the problem is that, next slide, we are lacking productivity at work, and that is making people unhappy. So I know that this started as like a AppSec question, but this is also about retention and about building your team and about just helping people feel engaged at work, right? Like, if we constantly are blocking their code contributions with failed lints, they are going to get frustrated. If our open source projects are too intimidating for developers to come in and quickly make a small contribution, it will discourage them from participating in our open source ecosystem. So we have to strike the right balance of usability and function, right? And that's what we're seeking to do here with this kind of architecture we're providing. Dan, I know I've been blazing through. I had half a pot of coffee before I started. Anything you want to add here?
No, I think I think it's really easy. So I shared this. I made some commentary on this last time that we talked about it. Like, honestly, the results of this survey were a little bit surprising to me at first. I would imagine when you ask thousands of developers, like, what makes you unhappy at work? The question or the answers are going to be things like, these were some of the answers, things like an unhealthy work-life balance or unfair salaries. But as it turns out, this lack of productivity being the #1 response at first was surprising to me. But then when I think back and, kind of take account of all the times that I've sat down, worked on building some sort of a project and had a frustrating experience during the build of that process or that project, I can empathize with that, right? Like, it is very frustrating to try to release software, to try to do it quickly, to try to do it within like the guardrails that are set out for my organization, and not be able to do that. All we want to, as people, as humans, is to do the things that we think that we do well. And when things get in the way of that, it's a very frustrating experience.
I tried to make a one-line contribution to Kubernetes for the docs once, and it took me like 4 hours. It was very hard. So we gave you this view of the tooling. Well, this is the SDLC, right? And then as we kind of built this slide out, we added in some of the different types of tooling. So kind of in this next build step, you'll see we added static code analysis and software composition analysis, infrastructure as code scanning, dynamic application scanning, kind of all of these categories of tools that address different types of threats in your environment onto the SDLC, and kind of talked about the complexity that creates. And further, this is kind of just the beginning of the pie, right? Like as we think more and more about different threat vectors, there becomes more and more different pieces of tooling we may want to add, or different types of coverage we want to build out. So we really want to give you a foundation that is flexible so that you can add all the pieces in that are important to your business, and kind of address, novel threats that we haven't, thought about yet, right? Because there's going to be a new yellow box that pops up here in 6 months. I can almost guarantee it. They keep popping up like weeds all over the place.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and I think that this chart really does paint, it's intentionally busy, right? Like it shows a lot of stuff, tacked onto the SDLC. And again, there's a reason for that. That's to illustrate the complex workflows that exist inside of software development environments. And it also illustrates sort of all the different places where a developer needs to have awareness of, all of which could be different user experiences that they have to deal with, different finding classifications, different integration points that can all kind of lead to friction and complications inside of that development process. So I want to open up a poll next. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to ask a question of the audience here, and we're hoping to get some feedback from everybody on the call. And what we're really interested in is like thinking about an SDLC like this. Are you currently in your environment introducing any blocking workflows inside of your design or your build processes, right? And this could be like blocking a pull request because of maybe test failures. It could be blocking an actual build or a release process due to a security check of some sort. Go ahead and answer. The poll should be showing up on your screen yet. Let's see if that is. Yep, that's open. Go ahead and answer if you don't mind, and then we'll start to share the results here in just a moment.
Yeah, and it looks like we're getting a lot of yeses coming in here, which I think is what we'd expect, right? Like, what's the point of having security tooling if you don't use it to do anything? So it's good that people are using it as blocking. But I bet if we had a second question, Dan, that says, have you ever gotten a complaint from a developer about it? We'd also get a lot of yeses. What do you think?
Yep, exactly. And that's kind of the point is, as a security team, our role is to provide guardrails to developers to make sure that they're able to, build secure software. But it's also our role to make sure that developers are able to build secure software quickly. And I think kind of finding that balance there is crucially important. All right, great. So it looks like we got all our votes in. Definitely a lot of guesses. We had a couple of no's, and it looks like we have 2. It's complicated. I think we all can kind of maybe to a certain extent relate to that. All right, let me go back and share my screen one more time. We'll jump over to a poll question. We'll jump into kind of the next section here. Just going to be a recap over our AppSec orchestration. So yeah, Jose, want to pass it back over to you, have you kind of work through this section here.
Yeah, so as we were talking last time, and I promise we're almost through the recap here and we'll dive into Dan's hands-on demo, we kind of called out these 3 elements to what we feel represents like this concept, AppSec orchestration, that we're introducing to you. One is the tooling, right? And that can be tooling from GitHub, right? Like GitHub code scanning, our static analysis tool, CodeQL, our secret scanning or credential scanning service. But it could also be other types of tools that plug into the code scanning API. So this could be infrastructure as code scanning, static analysis tools for other languages or other frameworks that maybe are kind of non-standard or proprietary to your business. Special lints for your business, that sort of thing, right? So anything that produces a security alert can be plugged into the code scanning API, and that gives you like the tooling side of it. But we also want to automate when those scans happen, because there's no fun in waiting for the engineering team to like be feature complete and then to have them like throw their code over the wall into some like binary analysis engine and like pray that like it doesn't explode. Like that's not a fun way to do software development. I've done that kind of development before, and it's frustrating because you get hit with some critical way late and you got to go back and figure out who contributed that. Why? Why is this there? What's this library doing there? Like there's lots of questions that nobody has any answers for. And like maybe the people that wrote the code are gone or on a different project. So we use GitHub Actions to do that automation and run the tools during the pull request workflow. And then we use the GitHub UI to produce visibility for all of those alerts. And the last topic we're going to talk about today is like, what if I need more enhanced visibility? So the visibility we give you inside of the security overview is really developer focused. If you think about GitHub, we're organized at an enterprise, an organization, and a repo level. And so we can give you data at all of those levels. But in like a microservices architecture, you may have multiple repos outside of a single organization that represent a single app. Like, how do I view that in a context? So we'll talk about some strategies to do that. But visibility is kind of the third piece of this puzzle that we wanted to hit on. And Dan made this beautiful build slide. So Dan, I just want to say thank you so much. This looks amazing.
I appreciate your input. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you nailed it, right? Like we're trying to kind of break down three concepts, which are the tooling, the automation, and the visibility piece. All these are required to have, what you would consider a mature AppSec orchestration platform. Really, it's the automation that makes all of this work, right? We've got the tools that are the engines there. They're doing the scans. We've got the visibility piece of it, but it's that actions aspect of it, right? It's that compute piece of it that allows you to broker data back and forth between your findings and your source code, notify people, trigger scans, those sort of things. That's where kind of the real magic happens here. Cool. All right, so let's do this. We all love polls. I think everybody likes the opportunity to kind of share a little bit more about their environment. And I think we have a little bit of a cheeky poll coming up here. Curious to hear about how you would describe your organization's CI/CD processes. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. That way we can get the results of the polls up on screen. We can kind of talk through it as the results come up.
Dan and I had fun writing this. We wrote this one at the end of rehearsing the session yesterday, so you're catching us at like 7 p.m. brain. But we were curious where you were on this spectrum. But it looks like most of you are great. They're shipping code regularly, still early adoption. I mean, this is good. People are fairly mature. Best in class. We can up the bars forever. I did not think we were going to get some picks on that one.
You never know. We may have.
You want to come on stage
the
for
JPL on the call.
Yeah, maybe we have JPL on the call. That's true. That could happen. Oh man, that would be good.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate too. There is the ability to raise your hand if you would like to come up on stage. Last session we did have a gentleman who came up and shared some thoughts. I'd be really curious to hear, from some of the folks, some of maybe the challenges that they experience in their CI/CD processes, and their automation around application security testing, or even sharing like some of what's working really, really well inside of their organization. So if you do want to come up on stage, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get you up and hear some of your thoughts.
We had one brave soul last time.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're going to get them again.
That's all right. That's all right. I understand.
But, what we're seeing here is that CI/CD has gone mainstream, right? Nobody is CI/C what, right? Like everybody has a concept of this. They're doing something. They've got some automation. There's a couple of folks here that are like, hey, we're clicking buttons, but hey, that's okay, right? Like there's value in having an ITSM tool that sits between you and a deployment, particularly if you're on-prem still, right? Like I don't want to ship updates that blow up my data center. You know what I mean? So there's like some value in having manual intervention at the right spots. But as long as you're working towards automation, I think that's heading in the right direction. And everybody else is basically like, yeah, we're going on the CI/CD journey. So as you think about the concept that Dan's going to share here next, I would challenge you all to think about how you could use this model for other CI pipelines. Like we're talking to you today about a security pipeline and about doing security checks, but this architecture we're going to share with you what it kind of does is takes the config file out of the repo and moves it to a centralized source. I mean, I don't want to give away all the drama for you, Dan, but it allows you to centrally manage how pipelines are deployed in your enterprise, and it could be applied for multiple different use cases than just security.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, you'll notice the poll that we asked a moment ago was a leading question to get us to this point where we can discuss kind of like the intersection between security and CI/CD. And I think a lot of times it's very easy for organizations kind of separate out, you know, like their security and application security testing piece and their DevOps, you know, workflows that are happening there. Frankly, these two things are one and the same, right? They need to be treated exactly the same. And we've got to figure out how best to scale and manage this at large scale. So let's do this. Let's talk back. Let's go back to the session that we had last week. So last week we discussed, you know, this demo toy app that we've got, which is this wildly insecure API. And we introduced 5 different testing tools inside of this repository. We've got an API testing tool, which is 42 Crunch. We've got CodeQL, which is doing kind of our baseline static analysis of the source code inside of this repo. We've got Gripe, which is going to be checking like our Docker file, looking for any of those common CVEs inside of our container configurations. Scorecards are involved here to check like the health of the repo. And then finally, AppSec, which is doing scanning of our infrastructure as code. This is complex, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that's happening here. And it's really easy for us at a single team level, maybe a small team of, you know, maybe 5, 10 applications to manage these configurations. But I don't think that it's too far of a leap to look at this configuration where we've got 5 separate, you know, configurations as code, right? Like actions, workflow files is really technically what's happening here. But it's not a large leap to see where, as you're thinking about scaling this to say hundreds or even thousands of repositories and applications, that managing these files, these configurations inside of an individual repository could be kind of challenging, right? You know, we've got concerns around things like the naming structure of these files. You'll notice I have codeql.yaml as one of the names of the files. That could be, you know, capitalized in a different way. It could even, in theory, be .yaml. So in order for, say, a centralized team, a centralized application security team to manage these configurations across thousands of repositories, they'd have to build some pretty next level automation to do things like make changes to these files, especially when they're named in different sorts of ways, especially when there's, you know, 5 of these individual files inside of the repositories. Jose, you know, I mean, like, I think this is kind of indicative of sort of the way that, you know, and what I mean by that is like the approach that we take here from a GitHub perspective is kind of indicative of the like general approach that we take toward building and shipping software for our customers. Do you have any like thoughts on like this approach and scaling it to sort of the next levels?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing here is like a general like Linux philosophy, right? Like if you think about Linux, like we know that with enough curls and pipe commands, like I can rebuild my own distro that no one wants. And so like there's a lot of power in taking small, flexible pieces of functionality and combining them together into bigger and bigger solutions. And so what you see right now is like there's a config file in a repo, and that config file tells your scanner when to run and where to send the results. And what we can do is we can make that file as complicated or as simple as we want. Right now, they map one-to-one to tools. But what if they didn't? What if they mapped to a reference file?
Yeah. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to demo this, and I'll actually share a link as well to these repos that we're looking at here in just a moment. But what we're able to do is take those 5 files that we have inside of, you know, in theory, hundreds or thousands of repositories and collapse it down into one single file. And the mechanism that we use to do this, and it's really easy and straightforward to look at this and say like, hey, as an internal application security team who's responsible for the security posture of my organization at the broad level, I'd much rather only manage one file inside of 1,000 repositories versus 5 files inside of 1,000 repositories. It allows us to scale, to grow, to be able to build tooling around this in a much more reliable and effective manner. So how do we do this? GitHub Actions reusable workflows. So just kind of as a quick definition of the idea behind reusable actions workflows, effectively what it is a GitHub Actions workflow. And the workflow is what defines the steps that need to happen within GitHub Actions. This is the control document that says this is what needs to occur. You can take that document, that workflow file, and you can host it and manage it inside of a upstream repository, inside of a centralized repository. And that's depicted on the top box here in this diagram. And then each of the different application repositories that are inside of your organization or your enterprise can call that upstream file, can call that upstream definition of a workflow in GitHub Actions. What this does is this makes the file that's inside of that individual repository, repository 1 and repository 2 that we've got documented here. That file is super simple. Like, it's dead simple. I mean, in fact, it's really like maybe 10 lines worth of YAML syntax that has to happen here. All of the complexity that is captured inside of those 5 files that we were dealing with initially, of which it is complex, right? Like, we've got multiple different actions that are happening here. Those all get collapsed into 1, maybe 2 different upstream files that's managed and maintained by your application security team. Why would we do this, right? Like, what's the purpose of managing our AppSec program as code inside of a reusable workflow like this? Number one, centralization. Any changes that occur that happen to our AppSec program happen inside of one repository. They happen inside of one configuration file, which is auditable. We know exactly who made that change. We know why they made that change and when it occurred. It allows us to apply like GitOps concepts to it, right? We can do pull requests and we can do code reviews on these changes within our application security team. It's simple. So dead simple. Anytime that we make a change to this centralized workflow file, those changes are automatically taken up on the next execution of that workflow in those downstream repositories, right? So say on the next pull request, if a change occurs in the upstream file, in the upstream workflow file, on the next pull request in those application repositories, they'll take those changes in, and the developer had to make 0 configuration changes whatsoever. It just occurs for them. And then finally, the flexibility aspect of it, right? So I think we can all kind of relate to a situation where maybe there's a testing tool inside of your CI/CD platform somewhere that goes horribly awry, right? Causes every one of your builds to fail across your entire application stack, right? Like, everyone's broken because some test tool is failing. In this scenario, instead of having to go through and make changes across 1,000 repositories to bypass that tool, we can make a change in one single repository. We can make a change in one file, and then on the very next run, the very next occasion that this file is executed against inside of a build, it's no longer run. We've just immediately bypassed that process. I want to jump into a demo of how this works. Jose, any other thoughts before we jump into that? Anything you want to clarify?
We have questions, my friend. I've got 3 really amazing questions for you.
Great.
And I'm going to ask them all together because I think they're kind of interlinked. So one is like, how do I think about like the scope of that reusable workflow? Like, what repos get to use it? So because like one size isn't going to fit all. So like, how do I accommodate that, right? And then I think 2 is like, even on a even if I can classify like a bunch of projects, like these are my C projects, or these are my Java projects, or whatever, these projects all use Gradle, like cool. But like they may still have individual specifics. So like, how can I use variables, or like how can developers set specifics of their repo in their like local repo config to like adjust how the reusable workflow works? And then I think the last one is also really interesting, and I think hits on the same thing, which is how do I version these reusable workflows and like release them as artifacts? Because if I make an update, I don't necessarily want to push that to everybody all at once. Per the prior two questions, there may be downstream, configurations that I'm not considering that are going to break that build with the new release. So like, how would you deal with those three challenges? And those are all questions from chat. So hopefully I summarized as well.
Yeah. So, okay, so we'll start with how these can be applied to a subset of repos. There's a couple of different strategies you can use here. You could either use it as a branching model. I probably wouldn't go down that path. In fact, let me go ahead and let me just share my screen here. I got to adjust my screen, and I'm actually going to walk through exactly what that looks like. So one moment here. So let's take a look at our upstream workflows. So in this case, this is where I have defined these reusable workflows. And you'll see inside of this repository, it's called security-workflows. I've got my workflows folder here. I've got two different workflows that are hosted inside of here. One of them is for an API. One of them is for just a regular kind of off-the-shelf application that we've built, right? I would maintain separate files for like maybe different classes of application within my environment, maybe different business units, maybe there's different restrictions around that, or maybe there's like entirely different deployment models that exist. There's a lot of flexibility that you can do. You can have multiple different definitions of reusable workflows in here. That's probably the best way to approach it. Alternatively, and this kind of goes to that next subject, is how do I handle things like versioning and really making sure that the releases that I'm creating are durable. You can do this via releases as well in branching models. So what you'll see is when I call, in just a moment, I'll jump into kind of the screen share for the downstream repos to see how this is implemented. But you'll see that we're referencing directly the main branch of this repository. So the idea here is if I need to make a change inside of the centralized workflow file, I would apply a GitOps strategy to it, right? I would make a change where, say, I wanted to disable gripe in my entire environment. I would create a new branch. I would effectively comment out this entire block here. And then when I merge that through a pull request process and a review of others on my team, once that gets merged into my main branch, all of those downstream repos are going to take that change immediately. Now, those downstream repos could be pointed to maybe other branches. They could be pointed to release SHAs. That's another option that you have there. But I think that the real kind of value in this is treating this file as canon, right? Making sure that this is the canonical resource of your definition and making sure that that main branch is equivalent to the production definition of your AppSec program. Looks like there's a lot of kind of communication that's happening in chat. Is there anything to did I capture everything there?
So Dan, how do I stop those pesky developers from editing that file? What if they turn it off?
Code owners. Code owners is a beautiful mechanism. So if you have a reusable workflow definition inside of your repository, you can assign your security team to the code owners for that file. And whenever a change needs to occur on that reusable workflow file, your team can be notified of it and be required to be the reviewer of that code.
Yeah, and this is
Let's show how this works.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. What were we going to say there, Jose?
Yeah, show them how it works. But I was going to say, this is, again, that kind of Linux style of development. Like, you're getting these like emergent properties from combining a bunch of simple pieces of functionality. Like, how do I enforce it? Turns out that was already there. You already have code owners and branch protection rules. Like, you've got what you need to do that.
Yep, exactly. Cool. Okay, so this is the repo that we were working off of last week. This is where we introduced this, where we've got, taking a look at our alerts here within the security tab. This is the value of advanced security, right? We're getting access to alerts from Dependabot, code scanning, and secret scanning as well. We're able to find, like all these classes of vulnerabilities inside of our code base. I'm in the code scanning section here, and if I hit the drop down for tool, you'll see we have multiple different tools. CodeQL is the GitHub-owned SaaS tool. The rest of these tools are not. These are third-party vendors, open source solutions that can be plugged in to give you value, inside of your application security stack. The configuration here in this repository from the repo that we were looking at, if we go and take a look at our workflows, we've got those 5 different workflow files. Each one of these 5 different workflow files are relatively complex, right? I mean, we've got actions. We're calling a specific SHA release of an action here. We're doing token definitions. We're uploading this content to code scanning. Like, this is all complex stuff for a developer to have an expectation to understand, especially when we start thinking about this as configurations for each of these individual tools. Let's take a look at what it looks like from a reusable workflow perspective. So same configurations, right? We've got the same thing happening inside of this repository. We've got tools that are showing up here. We've got results from these tools. We've got pull request integrations that are happening, right? So code scanning is still able to tell us that there are vulnerabilities inside of our PRs. But if I put on my developer hat and I think about the file that I have to manage and be responsible for in my environment, I'm going to be much more excited about, or much more relieved about maintaining this file. This is so much more simple, right? We've got our trigger. This is, just a preamble, right? This is required to define when our workflows run. All the other complex stuff happens here, right? As a developer, I don't need to make any changes to this file whatsoever. Maybe I pass in the programming language, but we can automate this as well. Like, this is something that doesn't have to be configured by a dev. Super dead simple. So let's take a look and dive a little bit deeper into that workflow so we can kind of get a sense of how it all comes together. So I'm pointing toward Octodemo/security workflows. I've already got that open here. That's where I'm at right here, Octodemo security workflows. And this file that we're maintaining is this file here. Let's take a look back at it. So code scanning -api.yaml, and we're pointing to the main branch. So now again, anytime that I want to make a configuration change to my entire environment, I can do that just by modifying this one file. If I wanted to execute or disable this gripe check here, edit the file, comment it all out, save it to a branch, we'll commit it to a separate branch. And then what we could do is have like a canary app that points to like that feature app or that feature branch over here, do our testing, all that good stuff. And then once we feel confident from the AppSec team perspective that this change is not going to impact our environment, we can go ahead and roll it out and push it to the main branch, just the same as we would any other code base.
There's still a fair amount of conversation going on here in the chat, and so maybe you could help say a little bit more. I think people are concerned, like, how do I make sure that this workflow file is present in every repo? And what I've been kind of saying in chat is like, this is a shared responsibility between the security team and the engineering team here. And I get how that is uncomfortable in some ways. Like, I think as security professionals, we are used to enforcing, hey, we want you to do X, we're going to set the rules, and then you've got to follow the rules. But this model, like, it's a little bit more like it's reliant on someone who owns the repo to merge the PR, to add the workflow. So could you say a little bit about that? I mean, like, to me, that feels like a healthy tension and conversation that should happen. But I could see why you want to avoid it. But I'd love for you just to weigh in on, like, what you think about it and how you think how you've seen customers deal with it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you nailed it with the concept of it being a shared security model, right? We as an AppSec team, like, the strategy that we're going to use here is we as an AppSec team, we define the policies, we define and make the processes extremely dead simple for developers. And we create it in a way that allows them to onboard and use these tools with as minimal friction as possible. There's going to be a much higher likelihood that developers are going to choose to, or are going to choose not to, bypass your tools if you make it super simple for them, right? They want to get the value out of it. They want their code to be secure. Like, everybody wants to do the right thing. If we make it as easy as possible for them, then they will more than likely choose to do that or choose not to intentionally bypass it. Now, all that said, there are controls that you can put in place to prevent them from bypassing it, right? Again, that code owner's concept. If we put a branch protection rule on the repo and says, hey, if you are to modify this reusable workflow, this needs to be reviewed by your application security team. Now, I'll caution, like, throw a word of caution on this, right? We also still want developers to be able to have some flexibility in the process, right? Like, you'll see in the workflow that I have created here, it's got these flags that allow developers to choose to skip these tools. You can build your workflow differently. Like, you can build your workflow to not have these inputs. I chose to put these flags in here to allow developers to make the decision to bypass these tools in a break glass sort of scenario, right? Like imagine if they can't ship code because your infrastructure as code testing tool is throwing up false results, right? Like that's not a good scenario to be in. You want to be able to, provide that sort of flexibility to your team. Then the other side of it is you want to be able to account for that, and you want to be able to validate those types of changes that are occurring. And so it comes down to this like trust but verify sort of model, where there are lots and lots of capabilities that are built into the GitHub platform that allow you to check whether or not developers are bypassing these sort of settings, and check, say, when the last time was that your code scanning tests ran. This is done, the configuration here is a cron-based check, right? So we know, we can make a query to the API for GitHub and say, hey, reusable workflow orchestration demo repository, when was the last time that you ran this workflow? And if it's been 2 weeks since this workflow has been run, we know something's wrong. Something's happening here. And so we can do follow-up from that, right? There's also, this is going to kind of like talk to the next subject that we want to get through today as well, which is that visibility layer. There's also a lot of really good visibility capabilities that are further baked into the platform that you can leverage as well. Things like webhooks, et cetera. We'll talk about that here in a few moments.
Yeah, and we're starting to get some questions about like the monitoring aspect of it. So we'll definitely get to talking about how we can tie this into maybe like a SIM tool to set an alert if a repo hasn't run this workflow in a certain amount of time. So that's one of the questions coming in chat. But the chat has done an amazing job of jujitsuing me into having to talk about something I didn't want to talk about, which is required workflows.
Required workflows.
Yeah. We've been pinned, Dan. We got caught. So we do have a feature called required workflows in GitHub. And if you're running non-security workflows, required workflows works fantastic. And you should use them, particularly in this architecture, because it solves the questions that folks are asking me in chat here about, like, how do we make sure that this workflow is utilized once it's in the repo? The one problem we've got with required workflows on security is there's something funny happening with the way that the upload to code scanning works. And so we've got people triaging that right now. And it's funny. It's like, this is the one scenario where reusable workflows isn't working exactly as we had hoped. So we are going to close that gap, I think, rather rapidly here. It's a big need from us, and we get it. Like, you want to make sure that this is enforced, and I think relatively quickly we'll have that solved. But keep an eye on reusable workflows. If you're not subscribed to the GitHub changelog, great place. Wake up in the morning, take a quick look.
100%.
You'll see new stuff coming out. I like to read coffee and look at the changelog every once in a while. It's a great way to see what's new on GitHub. You'll see a blip when that's resolved. But as soon as we have required workflows for security workflows, that's gonna solve 90% of the questions that are here, which is, how do I make sure developers are using this? At the end of this, we're also going to talk about how to monitor that. So we will close this gap with y'all. But thank you again so much for being involved in the chat, because this has been a lot of fun for me. And I don't know, Dan, I'm having a good time. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So hey, real quick, let me send over a couple of links to the group before I forget about this. I'm going to send these right in the chat. So I've got some open source examples of these required workflows, right? Like, this is intended to be examples for you to use, right? Don't call these workflows directly from within your repositories. Modify them, make them yours, make them what you need to see inside of your environment. On top of that, I've got an example here, which is another public repo of sort of that first pass, right? Like, this is the multiple different files that we've got included inside of this downstream repo. And then finally, we've got our reusable workflow example that's available here. And I'm sorry, these are kind of deeply nested links. I'm just giving you links directly from my browser window. Feel free to browse through the repo as needed. All right, let's shift gears over to visibility.
I love visibility.
Share the screen here, Jose. Yeah, me too. This is kind of like where I really got started in the AppSec spaces, in reporting on AppSec tools. So this is something that's kind of near and dear.
This was the first project we worked on together, Dan. This is how we bonded. We bonded over Splunk. We just did a little spaghetti kiss there. I feel dirty after that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about visibility here. There's been loads of questions about visibility, and we've got the security overview, right, which is a great place for you to get understanding of what's going on in your environment. And it really tightly wraps around our core features. So you can see here, we know where Dependabot is deployed everywhere. We know where code scanning is turned on. We know what repos have secret scanning enabled. And we can even give you interesting metrics about how long different alerts have been sitting in our system, right? So we know, like in this case, the mean time to remediation for a secret is 63 days on the 543 repos that have been affected. That's really useful, particularly if I own some of those repos, or if I'm in an org level view where all of the repos in that org are kind of under my purview as an engineering manager, or program manager or something like that, right? But as we kind of started this discussion earlier, like, what if I'm developing in like a microservices architecture and my org boundary ends, but I still need projects that are in a different group's org? Or, maybe I'm an AppSec professional and I want to provide a report to a VP about all of the programs that they have running, not, a repo by repo view, but really like, multiple repos or multiple environments, maybe even multiple enterprise instances that all wrap up into that, one VP. How would I do that with security overview? And the reality is today, you're not 100% able to splice and dice the data in every single way you may want to. This is really meant to address the top 50 needs that a developer has of understanding their security posture at an org level, repo level, or enterprise level. But it's not designed to be a general purpose data platform. But there's lots of general purpose data platforms that already exist. And we've got great API coverage on GitHub. We've got great coverage with webhooks for streaming events. So we can just push this data to somebody who has an amazing data platform to splice and dice the data in any way you want. And I think as we start thinking about plugging in all these tools and kind of all the alerts that they may create and all the different questions we maybe want to ask, what I kind of want is like a SQL-like interface to just ask questions about my data to. And I may want to join that data with other data, right? Maybe I want to combine it with the GitHub audit log so I can see if somebody edited a file and then reports stop showing up, or I can see if a secret's been used after it's been detected, or I can see other types of stuff. I don't know, like the possibilities are kind of limitless here, right? Like once I have my monitoring tool or my SIM tool tied into my GitHub security tool, I can do any kind of correlation I want. And we're just starting to tap what's possible here. Dan, what do you think about this? This was the first project that Dan and I worked on. We said, hey, there's no Splunk integration with GitHub, and that feels like a miss. And so we worked with Splunk and built this Splunk app, which has, I think, 24,000 downloads now. It's the number 2 tool in the Splunk marketplace under DevOps tools, which is really awesome and has been a great partnership. And then we built these other 4 with a really good friend of ours, Alex, here at GitHub, has worked on a bunch of these as well. And these have been really transformational for customers. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like the Splunk integration itself is a really good example of how you can get data out of. And we'll share the Splunk integration. We'll walk through it for the audience here to kind of get a sense of like what it looks like and what kind of data is included there. But I think the real story here is those underlying primitives, right? Like the fact that this data is available as both webhooks and as APIs, and it is so incredibly verbose that it really does allow you to effectively do whatever you want with it, right? Again, the Splunk integration, the Sentinel integration, Elastic, these are all like really simple kind of off-the-shelf things that you can plug in. But the value comes when you start stitching together your other data along with it. And that's really why we focused heavily on shipping this data to these external platforms is, what if, and you kind of set out this scenario, what if I wanted to learn about the count of, say, critical vulnerabilities for all of my application security testing environment for a particular VP in my business unit, right? Or what if I wanted to stitch together information such as like a relationship between my repositories, the different maybe secrets that are associated with those, and then like AWS information that's included, right? From that's mapped to this repository. That's data that's probably not going to be inside of the GitHub platform itself. It's probably going to live, right? Like the connector there is probably going to live inside of some sort of an asset attribution or CMDB sort of platform. And if you begin to take this data along with like your CMDB or asset attribution platform, stick it all into one spot where you can make queries and be super flexible about the questions you're asking, that's where it becomes really, really extremely powerful. Let me go ahead and share my other window here, and we'll take a look at this actual Splunk integration, and kind of see like how it all comes together.
What if I wanted to find the developer that contributes the most, credentials into GitHub across multiple enterprise instances? That was another one I was thinking. It's like I can find someone who's real sloppy.
Or what if we wanted to find the developer who's fixing the most vulnerabilities? I think that's probably maybe a better question.
Dan, always carrot, no stick.
Cool. Yeah. So here we are inside of Splunk, and this is just kind of a high level, what the UI looks like. One thing I'm noticing, and I got to apologize for this, I've got some pretty severely under provisioned infrastructure that's running right now, so it's giving me memory errors. Apologies for that. High level, let's just kind of walk through it. So we've got the overview page here. There's, I need to call out to this app, the Splunk app, the GitHub Splunk app has multiple different components to it. We're going to be focusing on the advanced security components. But to start, we've got an overview where we have a collection of all the different types of alerts. We've got code scanning alerts in here. We've got dependabot alerts. You'll see secret scanning alerts that show up here as well. And then we've got a list of all of those vulnerabilities here.
And we're just showing you Splunk as an example because it was the first one that we worked on. And we have this kind of robust demo environment, but the quality of the integrations is the same across Datadog, the Microsoft Defender catalog, the Sentinel catalog, right? Like any of these platform tools, we've enabled to do this. And you could probably do this with some open source tools like Elastic or something for relatively cheap. So there's some comments here worried about like buying another solution, but I think this is like another use case, right? And we hear you on that, but this is an advanced use case and it's a data problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the real value of kind of like sharing this is like actually walking through what the data looks like, right? I mean, it's really easy to kind of connect the dots here when you start to see like all the information that's included in these alerts. This is webhook powered, right? So all you have to have is a receiver that lives out there. In this case, Splunk is our receiver. You'll see you get some really interesting information in here, right? Like we know this is a Google API key. We know that the state here was rotated and we know who did it and why they did it, why they made this change, why they like marked it as being closed. But then on top of that, you can also get some really interesting information like about the repository. What if, in this case, we can get information about languages, right? The programming languages that are primarily inside of this repository as well. What if we wanted to do a filter on vulnerabilities by programming language, by organization? Very flexible.
Hey, Dan, what if I wanted to take some of this webhook data and then make an API call to enrich the data in sort of like a SOAR workflow? Have you thought about any of that?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, you absolutely could build automation to do that sort of process as well, right? So a really good example of this would be actually within the Sentinel integration that we have. Sentinel, again, it's powered by webhooks as well. In theory, what you could do is have an alert comes in, and then there's a workflow that you can build on top of that then triggers whenever it sees a certain type of message. Say, for example, a secret scanning alert comes in, right? Or maybe the state of a secret scanning alert was changed to bypassed, right? Or closed. You could create a workflow that then uses, say, an Azure function to make a call to the API to get additional information, or maybe reopen that alert and notify your application security team. It's kind of the world is your oyster sort of approach there when you start thinking about adding external programmability onto these workflows, onto this data that's available here.
I think people
Jose. So
most of the comments in the chat are like, I want GitHub to just build this natively. And I'm like, you don't know how much I want GitHub to build this natively. Yeah. I think one of the hardest things, and this is maybe off topic, but one of the hardest things about working at GitHub is there's so many problems that are like 1 degree away from where we sit. We're just so central in the pipeline, and it is so hard to prioritize what to do next. And I never envy our PMs because they must get pulled in like 1,000 different directions. Every customer has an amazing idea of what they could do with GitHub if there was just one extra piece of data available or one, extra piece of automation they could build. But again, I think this is hitting on that central theme that we've talked about through this presentation, which is that kind of Linux style of product management, right? Very discrete, deliberate functionality that's reliable, packaged up in a simple way, combined with other products like that, make amazing things, right? And we're starting to get to this point where you're like, oh, like if you just add one more thing, so many more things are possible. It's like, yeah, we see it, we want to do it, right? And that's why we're taking this approach. What we haven't shown you is a tops down, UI driven way of enforcing stuff around your ecosystem. And some people want that like dashboard driven or like, kind of like very, very like, I don't know, structured tool type, right? That's not exactly what we're building you here, right? Like GitHub is about giving you primitives and helping developers do customization with it. And it's just opening so many doors. Like you're all hitting on it in chat here. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I want to actually kind of like keeping on that point, Security Guy made a point a couple of moments ago where he said, I'd like to see GitHub add a product inventory feature where you could associate a repo with an app. We do that internally. Like we use GitHub to manage our product catalog effectively, right? So anytime that we want to open source, say a repository to the public, in order for us to do that, we've got a catalog that we've got to actually document this repository. Because like you think about like repositories really are kind of like the primary thing that we're shipping outside of the platform, right? So if my team, for example, wants to open source a repository, I need to go through this documentation process where I capture the asset. It gets effectively defined as an asset, which is a repository, and then it gets mapped back to my team and me as an owner of this. And then at that point, I'm now responsible for it. It's become, effectively like a CMDB for an application that associates it back to a team, to a repository, to an owner. And that's all done just using native GitHub. Like these are literally just YAML files that are inside of a repository. So it absolutely can be done there. And then there was another point around using the output of the GitHub APIs and sticking it into SQL, and doing like a data warehouse and business intelligence tooling on top of that. Yeah, absolutely. I've done that before myself, specifically with security data from GitHub at a company that I used to work for.
Alex, who built a lot of these integrations, is on the line. So Alex, you can flag that as one vote for more BI tools. We're definitely working on
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and we've seen some customers do some really, really interesting stuff as well. Like there are some of our customers who work in like the data analytics space, and just fascinating things that people are doing with extracting data and kind of doing their own data mining and analytics on top of it.
Since we're just sharing
and so then there was another
interesting. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say one thing that's interesting just to share, like we use GitHub internally for everything. So if you want to see like full GitHub on GitHub, like come to GitHub. Like that's what we do here. Like we use GitHub to solve almost every problem, sometimes to a fault, but like it helps us hit the edges of the product. We use GitHub as a collab platform, as central data store. All our docs are in GitHub. Everything's in GitHub. So we're living the dream.
There was another question around like using tags to kind of define and classify repositories. Like I love that idea. There's this concept inside of GitHub called a label or a topic, and these topics can be defined as it allows you to be super flexible and offer tagging. There's one thing I will kind of warn on that is it's really tough. Just seeing this as personal experience, it's really tough to define and maintain a tagging strategy within an organization. Like it's actually really hard to get that right. Tags as freeform text, naturally introduce things like typos and variables in the way that you do like casing and stuff. I love the idea there. And I encourage you to do it. It's a really good way to kind of like set solid definitions. Just think it through very well. All right. One last thing. I think it's really important for us as well to ask for feedback. These kind of events for us, this is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. It's something that we spend a lot of time kind of working on. And any time that we can get feedback from our audience, I think is really helpful to have us sort of refine these conversations in the future and, make sure that we're offering the right sort of information to the group. So there will be a link that comes out in the chat here in just a moment. Please do fill that out for us. And if you have any further questions on this, I'll offer myself up. I'm available on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I believe that information is available inside of my profile. So on the top, you'll see like the speaker profile area. Feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. Otherwise, that book a demo button up on the top right is a really good platform for you to just ask a question to, have us come in and get your questions answered.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming and attending these last 2 hours. What you're seeing here from Dan and I is honestly, it's 2 years worth of work. Like this has not been, this didn't happen overnight, right? It's a big body of work that we put together over the last couple of years, and it's not just Dan and I, right? We've mentioned Alex. There's a handful of other partners that have worked with us. We've had to involve a ton of people. So this is a huge body of work that we've been really excited to share with y'all. And it's been really meaningful to have so many of you attend and ask so many great questions. So thank you so much. And please do give us feedback on the presentation. We are going to start thinking about what we're going to do next. And I don't know what it's going to be, Dan. Maybe we got to do CI to rocket ships. I feel like seemed like we got a couple votes there. What do you think?
I love it. Yep, exactly. Sounds like we got some folks from that kind of an audience on the call that can help us out. So.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody.